Nulalinta milipaya, lekaman walaskanak wemi weltek keku tanamnik. Good evening, everyone. I'm Joe Baker, an enrolled member of the Delaware Tribe of Indians, co-founder and co-director of Lenape Center. And it's my extreme pleasure to welcome you here this evening to what is to be the final program of a very energetic and fulfilling run of the exhibition Lenapehoking in partnership with the Brooklyn Public Library, BPL Presents, and Greenpoint Branch. Lenape Center extends its gratitude and thanks to the staff of this amazing organization who has courageously brought our history to the public view. This evening, we gather here in the ancestral land of our people, the Lenape, and it is our ancestors who welcome you here tonight. And I personally am extremely proud to be standing in the room with fellow tribesman David Half, who's also is a member of the Delaware Tribe of Indians. So, Cora, I pass to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. This is such a wonderful and special evening and occasion. And of course, every opportunity to work with you and see you adds so much wealth, richness, joy to our lives here at the library. Thank you. And welcome everyone as part of Lenapehoking, as we heard. We're here to welcome Arizona-based Lenape visual artist Achipap Tuni, also known as David L. Half, who will share his visual arts practice tonight and talk about process as well as questions of history and identity that his abstract paintings speak of. He will weave together his life and his art during this presentation, with guest critic Joyce Bekenstein responding to the work following the artist presentation. Please also bear in mind that this talk will be followed by audience Q&A. So if you have a question, you can write it into the chat. There's a chat icon on the bottom of your screen, and we will take a couple of questions following their discussion. I now just want to a little bit more fully introduce our esteemed panelists today. Achipap Tuni, meaning to talk strangely in Lenape, which is how I'm talking, certainly, is a proud graduate of Pratt Institute, where he majored in the field of industrial design. His love for art blossomed at Pratt as he studied form and the interaction of color. His training is as an industrial designer, as I said. Moving from industrial landscapes of New York City to the bright desertscapes of Arizona, his work now embraces storytelling through memory. He will be in conversation with Joyce Bekenstein, an art historian and art writer living in New York. She is a contributing editor to Sculpture Magazine and a regular contributor to the Brooklyn Rail, as well as the New York Times, Hyperallergic, and Art Critical, being other publications she's contributed to. This program, as you heard, is presented in partnership with the Lenape Center. We'd like to extend a deep and heartfelt note of gratitude to Joe Baker, Adrienne Kumans, and everyone at the Lenape Center, the Shelley and Donald Rubin Foundation, as well as the many audience members who are here tonight, and many of you have been joining us for the exhibition at the Greenpoint Environmental Education Center, and for the many mind-opening programs that have been a part of Lenapehoking. Thank you. And without further introduction, Achipap Tuni, David Half.
Thank you very much, Cora. And thank you, Joe, for introducing here. I would like to start the presentation now, so give me 1 second. Okay, it's trying to skip ahead. Can't be having that. All right, thank you. Well, once again, thank you to the Brooklyn Library for having me part of this talk, and to the Lenape Center. And it is such a very proud moment to talk about Lenapehoking and our ancestors in this kind of place and forum. So thank you again, Cora, and to the Brooklyn Library for bringing this presentation together. So I believe the most important thing for us to start is, what is Lenapehoking? So this was a hike I had taken when I was living in Northeast Pennsylvania. That is the Delaware River Gap. It was a huge moment in time for me, reconnection to the land. From this strategic point, you could see New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, just some of the major states that we relate to Lenapehoking. And from there, I'd like to dive into the work. So one of my earliest works is this piece here, New York City Nights. I painted this in 2019. I painted this right before I left from Brooklyn. There are moments where I felt trapped by the city. There were moments where I felt the weight of the city was a burden. But then at the same time, there was this beauty and essence of the buildings, and there was this power of the city that I felt was lifting me up. So sometimes I show this painting in this direction, and other times I turn it standing tall. Almost to read as steps or a ladder leading into and out of this space. So there are elements in this work where I just think that the weight of New York was on my back, and the pressure was there. But at the same time, that's where I began to really find my roots back in Lenapehoking. Moving forward from there, the next big transition that happened to me is I had left New York, Brooklyn specifically. I was living in Clinton Hill at the time. I moved to Arizona. I was living in Fountain Hills. The light immediately changed. Living in New York, moving to Arizona, there's a very difference in the natural environment. So environment always has an impact on the work I've been creating. And in this piece, this was a big step forward for me. This was a moment where I had to reflect on what it meant to do a self-portrait. So I created this self-portrait drawing of Missining Mask. That is the traditional Lenape mask that is presented here. Underneath it, there is a full painting of myself as well. I hesitate to show this work, honestly. This is a very spiritual piece to me. I believe that when this work came to show itself to me, it was a moment for me to make a decision to fully engage with both sides of my ancestry, that of Lenape and that of European descent. I had always talked about the European side, and very rarely did I talk about the Lenape side. But there was something missing until I felt the desire to paint this piece. Even now, I rarely show this painting unless in this kind of platform to educate or to explain the significance. Because Missining is a Lenape spirit. He maintains balance of and over nature. His main role was initially used during gambling, which is a Native American ceremony that we practiced a long time ago, where he would be a guide to Lenape people, support them when they would go out for hunting, or if to farm, you would ask for his guidance and support in these kind of blessings. So during these ceremonies, one would adorn similar masks to these during that gambling. And additionally, they would wear bear skin over their back. This was a reminder to the Lenape people that Missining is always there with us. He's always there guiding, directing, and honestly making sure that we stay true to to the nature, and that we are practicing what we need to be doing. Missining is always with us, as I said. In the past times, the spirit would be given offerings during those type of ceremonies, or prayers to assist in a hunt or safe travels through the forest. If one didn't provide this type of prayer or thanks or gratitude to Missining, there's a possibility that he may play tricks on you, or that you may not catch any food, or you might not have the desired outcome that you sought. So it was something that we sought for and gave thanks to for a blessed journey forward. The next work I'd like to talk about is American graffiti. So this was painted in 2021. Having accepted to now explore that Lenape roots, this piece began to come forward. I came to a crossroad in my life, if you will, a place, one, to throw out all the previous knowledge that I had of my, of my European ancestry, or to completely focus on Lenape and indigenous beliefs and the spiritual beliefs. And then I realized at some point that I didn't need to throw out anything. I needed to understand the struggle of these two to further understand who I am. I am both of these things. So this work was a further exploration. I discovered that I did not need to choose one over the other, but instead to honor both. Knowing that with time, those layers that had once suppressed me would over time peel away as I would gain the confidence in telling my own story. So this is a combination of allowing the Lenape heritage to live comfortably with that of the European heritage. And although there might be some conflict, but accepting myself and accepting that that is a part of who we are, and we have to embrace that. So the next work is interdependence, talking about embracing continuous. So this work was painted in 2022. After I separated the Navy in 2010, my wife and I had moved to Northeast Pennsylvania. So that initial photo we started with is that around that time of 2010, I took that photo. One summer while we were hiking over the Delaware River until we came to that bluff I had showed you earlier, the vast lands of Lenapehoking took seat of my heart. Something was moving in me. I realized that I came back to Lenapehoking after traveling the entire world, traveling and living overseas for many years, living in the West Coast. Something had pulled me back to Lenapehoking. There was a call. Feeling that energy, I began to search. What does it mean to be present in that place? This work is a reflection of that time. For the first time, I imagined while looking at the Delaware River. This was the first time I began to imagine what my ancestors must have done while living there. They must have came down to the Delaware River and fished it. They must have come down there to cool off in the hot summer days. They came down there to use the Delaware River to transport materials and goods, to trade with people from far away. But then I didn't see those people anymore. I didn't see my ancestors there. I imagined them being in that space and I imagined them having that time, but that time had long gone. I felt sad. I felt sad that my ancestors no longer were doing those things on the Delaware River. But then something else happened. In the middle of painting this work, I realized that the land also must miss them, must miss the energy of those coming to the water's edge to fish their fish, to catch, to travel along the water, to give prayer, to give thanks, and to embrace the land and be part of the land. And then how does that impact the land? That feeling had led me to this place, this uncompleted work. I don't know if I will ever finish this work. For the moment now, it feels to me that the Delaware River is not complete. It's not complete without the Lenape there, and we are not complete without being there. Snapping back to my present, I realized this was once a sacred river and a landscape, which was loved by a great many of my people. And yet now the lands feel desolate, hibernating, if it were. In this now, I feel detached from what once was and what once could be. So this work is called Interdependence. The next piece is called Homecoming. And so a reflection of returning back to the Lenape lands. So this was painted in 2021. I did this as a collaborative work with my distant cousin, Rebecca Lori Half, excuse me. And in that, she created poetry. And in that poetry, I would think through what she was talking about. And I would then create art pieces based off the emotion or conversation that she was pulling forward. Often her poetry is talking about history of the Lenape people or talking about some of the events that took place. Through that, I was able to come up with this work. So what does Lenapehoking mean? Lenape meaning the people. Lenapehoking is meaning the lands of the people, which is the tri-state area. This was a place that the Lenape cultivated, the tri-state area, right? Cultivated with their medicines, plants, and farming techniques. A land that had provided them the medicines that they needed, the life that they needed, and a place for their ancestors to take shelter and refuge in. However, in the 1700s and prior to that, they began to leave the Lenapehoking. I wondered why. Everything that they had known, their custom, cultures, traditions, had all been in that land, and now they leave. The journey from the tri-state area to Oklahoma Indian Territory took over 100 years from beginning to end. Migration first from Lenapehoking into Ohio, then into Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas, and finally coming to the place of my grandfather's homeland, Oklahoma. Each generation being born in a new homeland along the way, further and further separated them from Lenapehoking. This really hit me when I was painting this piece. I realized that my grandfather was born in Oklahoma. His father was born outside of Oklahoma, and then his great-grandfather was born in another state, each losing connection back to the original, but still maintaining the traditions and cultures and bringing them forward, although they were born in different lands. I find it fascinating. What does the land mean to us? What does it mean to be separated and detached? Homecoming is about a return for us, returning back to knowing where we come from and experiencing that and living in that. And so I felt after I left the military, I was lucky enough to experience that, as I had lived in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York prior to moving to Arizona. The next piece is called My Bleeding Heart. This was painted in 2021. This is about tensions that built in what is known as the Nantahala, Ohio. It was a city where there was, but now it's a city or a place, but at one time there was a terrible tragedy, a massacre that happened there. And unfortunately it happened at the end of the American Revolution, which is strange. American Revolution, I believe for years was about something more than that. And here it was at the end of the revolution, my ancestors are being attacked. Why? I wondered. Prejudice, resentment, and fear led to this massacre of 96 Moravian Christian Indians. That also brought me more questions. These were Lenape who had converted to Christianity. Many of these people left their nations to establish a new way of living in hopes that through faith and understanding could one find peace. These indigenous people decided that they were going to make a stay and they were going to try to come into that land in a new way. And yet this happened. Feeling frustrated by that, I began to sit down to paint this piece. During their executions, this is one of the hardest moments for me. It is said that these families continued to pray. My heart does not bleed, though, for the cruel act that was inflicted upon them. Instead, it bleeds knowing that even in their last moments, they were looking forward to what lay beyond the horizon. Excuse me. They were looking forward to sacred lands, a place of warmth, a final place of peace. And so although they had suffered a great loss, families, community was destroyed, they were still looking beyond. This doesn't only mean a lot to me because of what happened to these individuals from my nation, but also it's a representation of all those ancestors who decided to leave Lenapehoking. They left looking for a new horizon, hoping for a better future, always looking forward. I thank my ancestors for making that journey, although many of them never made it to Oklahoma. The next work is called The Protectors. So on an up note, this was painted in 2021. It brings me great honor to talk about this piece. This work is based off of one of the poems that myself and my distant cousin worked on together. During the American Civil War, 170 Delaware Indians volunteered for service in the Union Army, which brings me great pride. The Lenape, Delaware Indians, numbered had greatly depleted by the time settling into the Kansas region, to the total of only 210 Delaware adult males between the age of 18 and 45. So out of 210 of these men that were capable of serving, 170 of them went forward and decided to volunteer to protect villages and townships that left empty. Why did these men serve? Was it for economical gain, hopes of being acknowledged, to retake land stolen by the Southern forces? Or was it a way to honor the sacrifices of those ancestors who laid down their life so that the next generation can continue? Myself, as a third generation military veteran, I serve with the belief that to be of service of something greater than oneself is an honorable gesture that I hope provides a better life for the next generation of all people of Turtle Island. I believe that my ancestors felt that same honor and they took up the vow to do the same. The next work is called Mount Mincy. This gets back to Pennsylvania and New Jersey, New York, as we're talking about Lenape hulking. This was painted in 2021. So coming full circle, now living in Phoenix, my most recent project is the production of a sculpture for the city of Tempe, which I have labeled Sacred Vessels. The location of this installation is between Tempe Lake and then Hayden Butte Preserve. The first known people to live along these lands were the Hohokam. Resourcing materials from the nearby lands, they created sacred vessels in which they were often buried with of their ashes or placed within these vessels. The idea of sacred vessels came to me from thinking of how significant areas like Mount Mincy and Mount Tani and their location to water. Through these earthenwares, civilizations, cultures, and cultivations were born around the world. From one generation to the next, those lands continue to raise up the next generation. Although I'm in not my indigenous place, I still feel a connection between other indigenous peoples. We have the same conversation, the sacredness of the mountains, the sacredness of the waterway, and then building a new way through. And so I would like to open this time now for Joyce, and I would like to say thank you for being present during my presentation. And I'm going to stop my screen share now.
Okay, hello.
Good evening, Joyce. Thank you for hanging in there. Appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, this is just so wonderful. I'm so happy to be part of this wonderful program, and thank Cora and you and Mr. Baker for making this a really interesting opportunity to look at an indigenous culture. I'm from New York. I'm sitting in New York. And every time I go to New York now and go through that tunnel, I realize I'm in Lenape territory. And that's quite interesting. But your narrative your journey has been quite remarkable. And what really strikes me about it is your ability to come to terms with who you are, to begin to connect your heritage, internalize it emotionally and spiritually, and then connect it to your odyssey in a way that helps you find your own balance and your own identity. And I think that's not just a personal story today. I think the issue of identity is something that consumes our culture. And I think it's something that we all grapple with. I think trying to find that balance between being in an assimilated culture and having origins in a tradition that gets lost through assimilation is something that resonates with so many of us. So I really welcome this opportunity to look at this and have this conversation. And what I think is particularly brilliant is the way in which you've been able to find this balance in your art. And as an art historian, as an art writer, what fascinates me is, how do you make art out of this? How do you take the line, the shape, the colors? How do you make those choices so that you can create a narrative which does not just speak to your personal story, but something that we can all understand in terms of our own heritage and our own cultural story? So what I would like to do is have a little fun here and ask you to go back and look at some of these works and try to talk about them. You've done a brilliant job in terms of telling us your story and your narrative and some of the feelings and emotions that you had. But I'd like to be able to talk about the visual language and how that visual language, how do you do it? Now, a lot of artists don't like to do this. They don't like to give away their secrets. So I'm going to ask you to give away some secrets. And having spoken to you a little bit about this, I know that you're willing to share. So why don't we go back to your self-portrait? Because I think that in trying to understand the relationship between the visual language and your narrative, the connection between the narrative and the metaphor, the connection between an artist who, as you do sometimes, paints things representationally, other times abstractly, other times non-objectively. That's a pretty broad range. So how do all of those elements, how do they carry your story? So why don't we just start with your self-portrait, because I've identified, for the purpose of just kind of making sense out of all of it, 3 themes. And the one theme that prevails and is the dominant theme, I feel, is this issue of identity. So could we put back up your self-portrait for a second?
Yeah, sure. Can you see that?
No, we're on. Okay, all right. So this is based on a Lenape mask, right? I don't know if you have an example of the actual mask.
No.
You don't. Okay, but the actual mask is really, when I looked at the mask, I said, "Oh my goodness, it's a mask, but then it's a contemporary man." So you have found this balance here between your traditional heritage as it is expressed in a traditional mask, which is red and black, right?
Yes, it is.
Yes. So let's talk about some of the colors here. How did you come to the red and black? How did you manage to contemporize this so that we go from a traditional tribal mask to a portrait of a man who is looking to find his core, his balance between these 2 traditions? What did you do to make that happen?
Okay, well, I would first say, when you had asked if I have an actual physical mask in hand, I would say that each mask is carved or created for the individual user. So they change a little bit based on each work you see. And so in that, when I painted this work, the red and black are the traditional colors of the mask. Red and black representing life and death, man and woman, and this duality between them and the necessity of both. And it is equally separated right down the middle, saying that both have this inherent value and the system, that they're equal. They both have a purpose. And then this mask, like I had said earlier, is worn during sacred ceremonies, which is about cleansing oneself. So I find it very interesting, this color, black and red, and that is one of the traditional colors that we would use during the ceremony.
It's interesting, the background, your background color. Well, what made you choose that? That salmon,
So,
beautiful.
well, I'll have to give a little bit of a hat tip to Joe Baker on this one. And not just Joe, but a lot of the beadwork that I was really fascinated with, looking at our traditional work, they would use these brilliant colors. And there was just this joy of seeing this kind of mauve or pink texture being used. And I never believed that those would be like, a traditional color that we would hold up. And so the more and more I began to learn about my ancestry, the more I began to look, and then looking at more modern contemporary stuff, I really found this love affair with these very bright colors. And not just about the brightness of color, but I think what they represent, this kind of energy, excitement, being present, being in place. And so that's where a lot of that bright color comes from. And I think also too, Joyce, that really resonates with who I see myself as. I feel I'm a very, I don't want to say bright person. That's not probably the most accurate, but I think I'm somebody who's very outgoing. This kind of energy I think I have. I really resonate with that sort of color. So when I initially went to do the self-portrait, that felt right to me. But as I had mentioned, something felt missing. I didn't feel like I had the grounding until I got to that black and red.
Well, that's wonderful, because it's you talk about finding balance, and you found your balance in terms of this enormous conflict that you had, really in your art. And so I'm assuming that when you're making this art, you're more and more coming to terms with your sense of peace and comfort with whom you are, and you're happier and happier in your own skin.
Yes.
The other and all the themes, the theme of identity is also, to me, very much related to something you were talking about, which is the theme of displacement. And the idea that, especially you were in army, you were in the army for several years, moving about a great deal. And when we first met, you told me that, it was very hard for you to find a place for yourself. It wasn't until you came back, I think it was to upstate New York, which was Lenape territory, that you began to sense your past and your tradition, and for the first time feel comfortable. And that theme of displacement, which you felt before you even really made a strong connection with your past, really speaks to the devastation that was done to indigenous cultures throughout our history. So I'd just like you to go back to that painting, Interdependence. I think you did a beautiful job of explaining the incompleteness of that work. And yeah, okay. And I looked at the poetry book that was done by your cousin that you illustrated, and I would just like to read a couple of lines from it, because it's from a poem called Homecoming. And great art is really visual poetry. And I'm just going to read a few lines of the beginning of Homecoming. And I just want our audience to look at this work while I read it. When we left, the land noticed. It did not consent. As for it, separation does not exist. The land wept. So when I read that, and then I looked at this painting, I realized that here, whereas you do an abstract portrait of yourself, in this painting, and I wondered why you did it, you did a representational head, you did a representational figure, and that representational figure really contrasts with this unfinished landscape. How did you come to that combination?
Well, thank you, Joyce, and thank you for reading Rebecca's poem. It really works well with the piece. So thank you for bringing that forward. So I started with the self-portrait. The whole left side was completely empty on the canvas, and I was doing this self-portrait. And there was a part in time that I decided to stop trying to draw or paint myself. Stop trying to see who I am. Instead, just try to be in the moment and allow what I think I look like or how people perceive me. I wanted to be free from that. So I stopped all of that. And at some point, I started to erase, where you can see this kind of dark smudge on the left side. And there was something happening. The underbase paint that I did was this yellow and green kind of swirling. And that was me using my finger moving through over the canvas. And I was just trying to think of what it means to be in touch with the canvas, to be in that moment. And I felt led to start sketching this of myself. So I started sketching his face. And I got to a point that I realized it felt quite empty. And so I had to stop on this painting, and I wanted to ask myself, why do I feel empty painting this work? And what does it mean to do this? And so once I realized that I was missing this conversation with the land, and missing being back in Lenapehoking, especially fall, is one of the hardest times. When we moved to Arizona, it's a beautiful place, but I missed the fall so much back in New York. And the spring, of course. I mean, all seasons are great, but the fall really hit me. And so while I was thinking about it, I started wanting to paint that scene. But I realized that my memory has faded. My recalling of it is faded. And I found there's something to be beautiful in that, right? So at some point, I realized that if I complete this work only talks about the springtime of the land. This work only talks about me. I feel like so much is lost when it's about more than just me. It's about a people, and it's about the beauty of the land. And I realized that I won't know what that looks like again until I'm fully living there, until I'm in that place painting this work. So that I felt like it needs to stop there.
So it almost has to be an unfinished painting.
I think so, yeah.
It's complete now, right?
Yeah, and that was
and it's in the incompleteness of what you feel and what the Lenape people still feel. So it really works, and it works beautifully. And yet it's such an unusual combination because, again, you have this representational form and this very vague but very beautiful abstraction of a landscape. Something that's a work that I found was quite different. Can you swing over to the Protectors for a moment? Okay. I'm just amazed at the range of your abstraction, the way you can move from expressionist brushstroke to geometry, from narrative to metaphor, from figurative to non-objective. And I in this work, which is called The Protectors, I understand that this really represents soldiers during the Civil War. Is that correct?
Yeah, these are men who volunteered.
Right. And I'm interested because all of those figures, to me, those little triangular forms which represent the soldiers, they're militaristic. I mean, they have a military, they're marching in lockstep with a cause. And yet they're marching on the red and the black. You know, they're marching on with sacrifice. And after the Civil War, they were weren't they? They were completely abandoned by those that they served. So I'm just wondering how you came to this far more geometric composition, which is a bit different from a lot of the other work that you've done.
Yeah, thank you, Joyce. So, this had a big part of it to go back to the missing mask and this life and death and the chaos and control, this kind of thing. There was a big conversation about that in my head while reading through the poetry. This was also one of those poems my cousin had put forward. And so one of the things that I really love about industrial design at Pratt is that they have told us or taught us about dominant, subdominant, subordinate. And so thinking through that process, I began to lay out this space. What would be the dominant? And that would be all those figures. So then what would be the subdominant? And then what would be the subordinate? And so that's how I really went through the layout of this process. The little forms themselves, I cut these individual shapes out, and I still have each one of these little pieces of paper. I can't let go of them because to me, they represent the actual people who was talked about. It represents each one of them. And I used those little papers to then paint onto this canvas or onto this material. And sometimes these little pieces of paper would fall off where the paint would not properly adhere properly. So at the top, you see like a kind of a black space breaking the horizon there. And I got frustrated at first because it's supposed to be red. It's supposed to be this other red shape. And then I stopped myself and I thought, not everybody came back. Not everybody came back. Even if they came back, they were different. Always word changes here. These people, they went with an idea and they came back something else because something had happened. They experienced something different. So I realized that having that moment where the red paint peeled off one section, some of it was cracking, I began to like it. I began to think of it in my own journey in the military, which is, thinking about PTSD or this kind of stress anxiety. They must have experienced it as well. And so it felt very true to me that these pieces, some of them would crack and some of them would fall away and disappear. And so I felt like that was a better representation than what I had originally created.
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful explanation. And boy, it works. I'd like to just contrast this to Bleeding Heart, because that's also about war. And look how different it is.
Okay.
Over here, it almost feels like people running from battles with their arms flailing and weapons flying, and the colors, represent sacrifice and death and movement and churning. And yet there's the sun, and yet there is warmth. And I was really taken with the way in which this particular painting, I just really wonder what you were experiencing while you were doing it. Because I would think that the more emotive your feelings were, I am guessing, the more abstract and non-objective, and the more just into the energy of color and line and space we're taking over. It's almost like you're listening to music with lyrics, and then you get caught in the lyrics, you get caught in the music, and you're forgetting the lyrics, and you're dancing, and you're not even hearing the words. But nevertheless, you're feeling the music. And there's something like that is what I'm sensing here. Could you just kind of describe a little bit of what it felt like to do this painting?
Well, absolutely, Joyce. So, even during the presentation, I started losing it there. So thank you, everyone, for hanging in there, because it does still hit me. Thinking of what had happened, and then thinking about the commitment and thinking about how they were still in prayer, and during prayer, they're being killed. It's just unfathomable to my mind. So when I sat down, before I sat down to paint this piece, I had the yellow painting. The canvas was painted yellow for almost a year and a half. and it was just sitting there, and nothing ever, I could never get motivated to do anything on a Joyce, right? And then, like you said, there was that moment. It was quite late at night, like 1 o'clock in the morning or something. And I think I had recently read some other travesties that happened. And I was sitting there thinking about those things and not really, thinking too much about the actual event, but just thinking about, how hard it must have been. And I got up and I started painting, and I felt very emotionally connected to that point. I felt overwhelmed. Of course, crying, those kind of emotions were there. And
Wasn't that
but then at moment-
the massacre of the Moravian Christian Lenape after the
yes, it was.
yeah. So this
Yeah,
was
Joyce.
an awful piece of history.
And so I began to just paint very vigorously and very rough, frustrated, anger that could happen to anybody, right? And regardless that they're related to the Lenape, not all of them were Lenape. Many of them were other indigenous peoples as well. So it wasn't just about Lenape; it was just about the travesty that had taken place. And then, as I stepped back, I realized that it couldn't have gone on a better backing. That yellow was so appropriate for it. I realized that while I could sit here and look at only the travesties our people have been through, I wouldn't be actually seeing what they were looking forward to, which was this brighter dawn, this brighter horizon. And once I got to that feeling, that's when the label came, My Bleeding Heart, because I realized that I had been focusing on the negative when I should be focused on something further, something ahead.
Well, it's interesting because I think the third theme here, after identity and dislocation, is the large theme, the universal theme of chaos and order, and how we are all internalized those two opposite poles. It's a human thing. It's a cultural thing, and it is an artistic thing. So I think that the balance and order that you find compositionally in this painting, and the arrangement and the way in which all of these elements come together as a compelling visual form, is really one with the chaos and order that you've had to find a balance within yourself. So I think one of the reasons that your art is so authentic is because it really does come from this sense of necessity, and this ability to put it all down on canvas and to do it intuitively. There's so much more we can say, but I think our time is kind of up for this part of it. And I know that we want to leave room for questions. Is that right, Cora? If Cora's around?
Yes. Thank you both so much. That was really a really engaging discussion, and I feel like it could go on a lot longer. But I just wanted to pivot for a moment, and I'm sure there'll be more really brilliant observation and depth. And thank you, David, also for your generosity in kind of making yourself available around this work. That's not something that typically is always the case. I think, as Joyce alluded, many artists are very private about not only their process, but the emotional content and their biography. So thank you. I did see there are some really interesting comments and getting a lot of love here in the chat. And I'd like to just pull up a couple of questions. This is from Will Peter, and I really enjoyed this question. Would you please share your thoughts on the name Delaware, both as it relates to the Lenape people and the river? And then there's a part 2 to this question, if the naming of things influences your work. In other words, I think Will is alluding to a question about how you title works.
I might ask Joe to jump in if he has the energy to talk about some of the Delaware naming convention. But I will start in the reverse order of the question, I think, Cora. So I do like using some of the Lenape language for titles because I want people to want to hear the language or at least be exposed to it. I think is important. And also, I think for me too, sometimes, I guess it goes back, there is a multiple sections to it. So sometimes if I'm painting work that doesn't necessarily feel like it's lending itself to that conversation. For instance, if I'm doing, I don't know, a landscape painting of some sort, and it's not referencing Lenape land, then I don't see the necessity to do that. But if I'm in that present moment and I'm thinking on Lenape stuff, I definitely would label it with this kind of language because I think it's important to recognize that that's coming from that's part of me. And then I think, like I said earlier in my my presentation, that I also still want to honor the European ancestry. I love Cubism, I love modernism, I love the futurism. And so some of the work feels like I want to honor that part of it. And so I don't use Lenape name for all things. And I think that talks about when it comes to the works. Now, my personal feeling about the tribe of Delaware Indians, as our nation is called currently, I had a lot of conflict with it initially. And I think it's similar to the term Indian, Native American Indian. And I struggled with that for a long time because what is Native American Indian? It's so far from what we are. We are a nation of multiple peoples of very different cultures and traditions and communities and completely different. And Indian is this term, has nothing to do with us. But at the same time, there's a moment that people understand that. And I feel like the more hung up I get on that, the less time I have to actually talk about the story of the Lenape people. And I guess when it gets back to the name of the Delaware River, I would love to hear the name of the river being called and used by its real name, just like Mannahatta instead of Manhattan. There's a moment of pride and honor in that. But there's also a part of me that says that my history is also your history. My heritage is also weaved into the early American history. And so I don't want to throw away this opportunity for us to weave together and come to a place where we can have this discussion. My grandfather was quite proud of being called a Delaware Indian. And I think because of that, I feel led to still go by that as well. Although most of the time I will tell people I am of the Lenape people, but that I will also explain the Delaware tribe of Indians. So it is a very complicated question and no easy answer. And I don't know if I get rid of one thing and only use that thing, if that's a better solution. I think it's more tied into having the conversation and kind of living there in the uncomfortability of that, and having talks like this so that we can discuss that. Like I said, Joe might have more to say about those things, but as myself, that's how I feel. So I wouldn't say that I speak for all Indigenous people. I can only tell you from my personal perspective, that's how I see it. So hope that answers the question in a roundabout way, Cora.
Okay, good. Thank you, David. And I can contribute a little more information regarding the term Delaware. Delaware is an English name that was given to Lenape people after Sir Thomas West It is the name that is used in all the treaties. And so really throughout many generations and throughout our history, the names have been in parallel use. Again, I think it points to and underscores the complexity of this very times in difficult history of colonization. And also, it's for me an opportunity to mention the Treaty of Fort Pitt, because I think generally speaking, so few people know about this partnership among the Lenape and George Washington, which resulted in the Treaty of Fort Pitt, 1778. So in exchange for military support of Lenape interest with George Washington against the British, the Lenape nation was to become the 14th state in the newly formed United States. So imagine, of course, that treaty was not upheld, but imagine what difference there would be today had that treaty been honored. We would have been the 14th state of the newly formed United States government.
Thank you, Joe. Which brings me to another comment that Sandra Lowry raised in the chat about what it means to be someone of Lenape ancestry serving for the military. And, you know, you touched on this, obviously, but I think there's perhaps more to be said there. You know, it being a point of pride, but it also being a kind of a paradox, perhaps. Could you speak to that a bit more?
Yes, of course, Cora. And thank you for the question, Sandra. You know, I was reading a great article the other day. They were talking about necessity for indigenous peoples to want to serve, just like their ancestors did, so we can have this kind of badge of honor. Maybe that is interwoven in my culture and in my background, in some kind of deep layer. There is that desire for that, to be of service in that way. But I think as indigenous people, I think most indigenous people have this idea of community, and community always comes first before self. And I think that's what really led me to want to serve. All my family serves. My mother, my father, my brother, they have all served. My grandfather served. So there is this, you know, that's part of it, but it's a deeper than just because others had served. I believe that Turtle Island is something precious. And that by being a service to the United States Navy is actually more about me being in service to North America, my homeland, and to the land of my people. That is very heavy in that conversation. And there was a point where I felt like I'm not doing that anymore, and it was time for me to leave. So there is that conflict. There is that question of am I serving the land of America? Turtle Island? Am I serving Lenape Hopi? Am I making my people proud? You know, and but I think there's always this part of community. I think that is one of the indigenous people's greatest strengths and also a weakness, because then often we will sit by and we will be afraid to. I shouldn't say we. I would be afraid to step forward to say, "Hey, I can take that. I can do that," because that's not in my belief to do that. My belief is to stand by, and if necessary and called upon, then to step forward. And so this gets back to that chaos and control that you and I were discussing, Joyce, about, you know, how do you live with that? How do you break out of that kind of space? And military only kind of pushes you back into one of those spaces. So I think going back for design, highly, and especially Pratt Institute, really pushed me back away from that. So now I have a more equilibrium of both chaos and control in my life at all times, which I need to be, I think.
That's great. Do we have any other questions from our audience? I saw there was one other question about making sacrifices to the trickster deity before embarking on travels. Is this something relevant to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so many great stories. I love that this. Well, so one thing that we really talk about is too much, Joyce, and I should have brought it up, is that I love the oral tradition. There's in the Lenape alone, there is a many rules, I would say. I don't know if that's the proper term, but you would say certain oral traditions at only specific times of the day and only specific seasons of the year. If you didn't abide by those rules, it said that, like the creepy crawlies of the world will come up upon you. And so I'm always interested in how, the necessity to be mindful of these kind of spirits that live in the forest and that we interact with. And there was a long time in my mind, I was brought up in Christianity. I still hold that faith, but there's a part of me too that I start to see these other things in the Lenape history and oral traditions and these conversations about these spirits, and specifically Nisinim. When it comes to this individual spirit, I am very I don't know what's the word, in awe of. I think there's a couple conversations about if you didn't provide tobacco, during one of the gambling ceremonies, he would smack you with a stick, and get the little kids in line, and you better behave. And I found that to be really beautiful. And I think once again, it's a community. These spirits help guide us as a community to do the right thing. And to appreciate where we come from. And there's stories of the trickster, and there's many different spirits. So, to say that this is that one, it would be hard for me to say that. But I think it is, for me, I found Nisinim the most interesting, just because of the spirit's connection to gambling. Which is the big house ceremony. We no longer practice it today, but it is one that I find very beautiful because it's really about humbling oneself. You come to this place and the community comes together. Everybody serves a role, everybody has a place. And then you go through this kind of process of cleansing and coming into a moment in time and gratitude and letting go of the self. And I think why that resonates so well with me is that I feel like that's how the transition of my life has gone, moving from the military and dealing with a lot of things, post PTSD and this kind of stuff. Then how do I release from that? And there was this moment that I had to go on this spiritual seeking journey through art to find that. And so I think that's why I'm more focused on listening because of that kind of thing. There's more about the tricksters and stuff, but I usually just lean towards listening.
Thank you. I think once again, I want to thank you for kind of dispelling some of the false dichotomies, and also through your work and through your story, getting us towards a space of wholeness and one of dynamic movement from again, these false dichotomies of something being historical or contemporary, something being traditional or non-traditional. We can go on and on and on. Abstract, versus representational. Really see a beautiful spectrum here in your work. And I also think that's been an important part of Lenape hooking. Joe, if you want to speak to that, is to kind of dismantle some of these projected false dichotomies that have been assigned.
Very much so. And the idea that tradition is not abstract is, false. That's a false boundary. I mean, tradition is endless, it's boundless, it's forever forward, and it's continuously evolving. But the colonists really have needed to keep indigenous people and their art practice in a particular place or a space, because that's how one acquires and starts collecting what is identified as traditional Indian art. So any outlier, that's beyond that kind of figuration, the expected, the norm by white society, is automatically suspect. And so I think that's what David has been able to do tonight, very eloquently and beautifully push back against that kind of silo. We in this world today, both within the university, within our political systems, within our work practice, we exist in silos, and we express our life with walls around them. So that's one thing that we wanted to do that was very important in the exhibit, is that we wanted to lose the vitrine. We wanted to lose the casework. We wanted to make the work sing in the middle of the space so that it could actually be in conversation with the visitor. That is so important. David spoke to that, about the value of community, of kinship, of relation. It's the stuff of life, and it's really where we need to be going. I get carried away, so with that, I'm going to put my mute on, and thank you.
Well, I will jump off of Joe's talk, because I wanted to acknowledge what Joe's saying and to say thank you to Joe. And I think one thing that has been very difficult for me, and it's a good difficult to have, is that because I didn't grow up on a reservation, am I Native enough? This was a problem that I live with. Am I Native enough? Is there such a thing? What does it mean to be Native? So this is the extra content, or the extra fight that I think a lot of Indigenous people are struggling with, especially those ones who are not growing up in their communities. So being able to come to the Lenape Center, come and speak with Joe and Adrian and my cousin, I begin to find that place. Yes, I am Lenape. Whether it's enough or not, it's not important, but I am Lenape. And so in that content and in that voice, I realized that I don't want to paint certain ideas that people will say, oh, that is Native American. I want the conversation to be deeper than that. I want them to look at it and maybe see a feather in the underlaying of the underlaying, because there are many in these works. The protectors, Joyce, one of those shapes are all resembling feather fans that we would often use. And so I attribute these forms into these conversations, but I don't want to give away that easy conversation. I want to have that difficult conversation that brings you closer to the work and brings you into the world that I know, that I'm feeling, and for us to have that dialogue. And so I think abstract is that place. So I really thank Joe for what you said about community and forward thinking, because I think, yes, we need that more today than ever. And so I'll stop there because I can get carried away.
Well, I will be the unfortunately the person to take us home tonight, but with great thanks and gratitude that we could all be in community in this program and throughout this whole experience of Lenapehoking. And so I want to thank you again, all of you, Joyce, obviously, David, Joe, all of the people who listened in tonight and who will watch this at some future point in time. Thank you so much. And good evening.
Anishi, thank you.
Manishi.